Hello ladies and gents. This video is the first of two parts where I build a post-apocalyptic zombie diorama in 1/35th scale. So this idea started when I got the Zombieland figures from Masterbox, and I've been wanting to do a post-apocalyptic kind of Walking Dead zombie style diorama for a while, and I thought that being stuck at home during the lockdown would be a great opportunity to get started on it. So you can see here that this figure set has 4 zombie figures and also this woman on the bike. It is worth noting, and I didn't realise when I bought it, I should have paid more attention, that the bike isn't included in the set. That's not clear from the box art on the front, although it does actually say it in big letters on the right hand side, if I'd bothered to read it. Oops. But that isn't such a problem because I decided to take the woman figure, and rather than having her on a bike, I decided to have her kind of scaling a fence at the end of an alleyway to escape the zombies. And I think with the figure mocked up the way it is here, I could get that right arm and that right leg onto a fence to make it look like she's doing that initial sort of climb onto it. So the first thing I did was get a piece of paper and sketch out roughly what I wanted. And I wanted a main street coming down here and then an alleyway off the side. And one of the buildings would have like a fire escape, a raised fire escape. And originally I thought that I'd have the figure about to climb up onto the ladder going up to the fire escape. For this project I used a lot of reference images for inspiration. So for example here, this classic old red brick factory. You can see the condition of the bricks, all the different colours on it. You can see the green mould around the sink on the left. Lots of inspiration here. And here again another kind of red brick factory, big tall windows, lots of sort of furniture on the outside, lots of steel girders and pipe work and things like this. And here I really like the way that nature is taking over the building, the plants growing back through it, there's moss growing on the lower halves of the walls, there's even trees growing up as high as the first story. And again the pattern here and also the age of the brickwork. You can see lots of patterns in the brickwork where doors and windows have been bricked up over time at different stages. On the right hand side is a kind of triangle pattern which suggests maybe a smaller building used to be there. And then just some more reference images of things like this very old wood, and the way the lower courses of the brick, the cement has come out of them and they're loose. And even the colours here, you've got everything from almost black bricks to very bright orange bricks and everything in between. And the same thing for these windows here as well. So lots of great inspiration. Hopefully some of those things I'll manage to incorporate in the diorama. So I decided that old red brick factory kind of look was what I was going for. So to make the bricks I used this latex brick mould from Diorama Debris. And here's an example of 2 of my earlier tests with the brick mould, one made with hydrocal and one made with plaster. You can see particularly on the bottom wall there that the liquid, the plaster, has not gone fully into the mould, and therefore the brick surface is a little bit uneven. Now that's a mistake on my part, but it also is quite a useful feature to have because it gives a bit more texture for a very old, decaying kind of wall. If I was building a brand new building, I would not be happy with that and I would need to redo that and make sure I mix the plaster and everything properly. But for making an old building, that kind of mistake is not such a problem. And you can see here a much better pour that I've done. And also you can see that these 2 sections interlock very nicely. And they can obviously go in flat sections or they can go around corners as well. So to give the alleyway a sense of foreboding and a place of entrapment where you really can't escape, I wanted the building on at least one of the sides to be really quite tall. So I decided to make this a 2-story building, and you can get a rough idea how that might look when finished. I marked out the buildings on a XPS foam base. You can ignore the pencil lines, they were incorrect, it's the red lines which were the correct ones. And then I built the framework for the buildings using some foam and pinned them together while the PVA glue dried to hold them in place. Of course, in some cases I needed to cut these wall sections into smaller sections, and the best thing to do I found with that was to score it slowly with a sharp knife. Gradually work your way down, not trying to go all the way through the piece but just gently scoring deeper and deeper each time. and then once you're a good way through, you can snap fairly cleanly the two pieces. I used this modelling paste to attach the wall sections to the foam, spread it around thinly, and it forms a really strong bond. I found that plaster of Paris worked better than hydrocal for the wall sections. And you can see here that this looks a little bit ugly at first. I've got this nasty crack in the middle where I pushed down too hard on the wall section. That won't be a big problem because these again are supposed to be old walls, so a little bit of a crack won't be a problem. The joint between the top and the bottom and the left and the right are more significant, so I decided to fill those with some more of the modelling paste. And I used plenty of it, filling in the gaps. Wiping it away while it was still wet. And then again, while it was still wet, trying to recreate the cement between the bricks to continue that pattern. It doesn't look perfect still, but again, if we look back at the reference images, we saw lots of walls where there were these strange lines on them where maybe older buildings have been taken down or buildings have been extended and so on, so I'm not too worried about that. I think that's still in keeping with the feel I'm looking for. I wanted the front of this smaller building to look like it had been plastered over and painted, so I used some of the modelling paste over the top of the wall texture just on this side, and that had the effect of reducing the depth of the cement, and I think it looks quite nice. It just makes it look different from the side, a little bit of variation. For the larger building here, I haven't shown the whole build process, but you can see from this image how I went about it. It's a series of those brick sections cut into smaller columns and built up. And of course I've left a space here for a big factory door on the right hand side at the bottom, and a big open kind of factory, old style factory window at the top there. Again, there are some ugly gaps still. There's an ugly gap on the corner, and there's a really ugly gap here between the window and the door, but they will all be filled later on. The window I decided to back with a piece of styrene which we painted black, and then I made the window frame itself from a series of 4 separate window frames which I found in an old mini art kit, and I just stuck them together horizontally. I feel like that has that old wooden factory window style, which I really want. For the big main factory doors, again these pieces came from a old mini art building kit. I think these were supposed to be to make up a wooden crate. The 2 bottom halves are straight off the sprue, and the top halves of course have been cut to form a curve there. And for the metal work on the door, I simply used some spare photo etch parts from another kit, and I didn't even use the parts themselves, but I used the photo etch sprue, the photo etch fret for that. And I found a couple of triangular pieces there, made quite nice hinges as well. Of course, the great thing about making a post-apocalyptic diorama is it doesn't really matter if things are a little bit messy. It doesn't matter if things are not fully stuck down. The hinges here I did leave deliberately not stuck down, and I wanted to make them look like they were falling off. But mistakes can be hidden and excused as well, which is quite nice. And the rear of those doors I reinforced with a little bit of styrene to keep them together. If I fit those into the space, that's starting to look quite nice already. The gap at the top of the doors I didn't really think about until this stage, and I probably should have done, but I decided to fill that with some kind of foam to make a kind of concrete sort of header arch over the doors. Of course, as we saw on the reference images, there are lots of bits and pieces on the outside of industrial buildings, so I went to the spares box, I had a look through it. I found some things like these jet intakes from a Harrier, these grab handles from a Russian T-34 tank, bits and pieces, I think this was from a Sherman kit. I don't remember where these pieces were from. And then some gauges from a Flak 88 kit, and a few other bits and pieces as well. It doesn't really matter what scale they're in. some propellers from torpedoes which might make nice extractor fans or something similar. I think this piece here was from an engine of an old ICM vehicle that I built, but it looks like a sort of gas main or something similar to me, so I decided to stick that on. I did consider covering the gap in the wall with a drinking straw to be a drain pipe, but I decided against that later on. Again, I don't really remember what this piece came from, but it makes quite a nice looking sort of electrical box, a fuse box or meter box, something like that. And with some old copper wire from some tank kit, that looks quite nice as well. To make the fire escape, I took this frame from a mini art building kit. It's a window frame. And I had a spare piece of metal from a sieve which I used for the flooring there. And some fences, again from a mini art building kit. You get loads of spares in those kits. And that just provides the rail around the side of the fire escape. Of course, every fire escape needs a ladder, and this ladder came from my 1/35th scale Leopold railgun kit. I think I must have built the kit with the ladders retracted, which is why I have this extended ladder as a spare part. And I modified it slightly to make it look a little bit better, but essentially it's straight from the kit. And you can see here I formed a sort of a little bit of a ladder on the top left of the building there, using those grab handles I showed you earlier from the T-34. At this stage I decided to use more of the modelling paste, partly to close up any gaps and partly to try to simulate maybe plaster or something that had fallen away. I didn't really like the effect, so I didn't continue with it much, and I wiped a lot of this away afterwards, but I did use it to cover the gaps. To get the correct texture for the roof, I used initially a piece of sandpaper. Later on I decided this wasn't quite the texture I wanted, so I went over it with something different, which I'll show you shortly. But initially I went for the sandpaper. And I thought old buildings often have quite fancy edging around the roof, so I decided to make one of those using some more XPS foam. And again, that was all attached using modelling paste. And a little bit of a liner at the edge to simulate that roofing felt. I decided I wanted something in the roof to break up the flat monotony of it. I thought I would try and get some extractor vents for air conditioning or similar. So I took these parts here, these photo etch parts. I think these are from the Takom King Tiger set which I built. I feel like these are the ammunition racks, which I didn't use. And I was able to bend these into shape and use some styrene and build these into something I think which resembled a extractor vent. And again, for the grill on the top, this is from the King Tiger, and I cut a rectangle out of that, and I think that's a fairly decent looking extractor vent, just on top there. And for the second vent here, which I left open, I used that torpedo propeller and a few strips of styrene to make it look like an extraction fan. I thought I'd put a little bit of a conduit on the roof as well for some cabling. These parts, if I remember correctly, were from the suspension of a T-34, and some cable there which I think came with my Flak 88, which I can run inside it and make it look like there's some cabling on the roof, and since the apocalypse that has somehow been hacked open by some scavengers and the cable's been extracted or something. Okay, and here's the first mock-up of the diorama. I'm going to freeze frame there because I've done quite a few things that I haven't shown. First of all, I put a wooden edge around the base, and then I used some hydrocal to put the roads onto the base as well. I used a photo etch manhole cover that you can see there in the centre. And I also, once it was dry, I carved in a few sort of scratches and dents and cracks and so on into that road surface. And you can see here on the smaller building I've added those little gubbins I showed you earlier, the gas main and the sort of fuse box kind of thing. I used a grab handle from another tank to look like the handle on the fuse box. A couple of pieces of brass rod across the top into some kind of box that could be maybe a burglar alarm or some kind of electricity box or something. I decided for the roof of the smaller building, rather than using just straight sandpaper, I would cut the sandpaper into squares to represent individual sheets. So you can see one of those squares is actually popping up there. That's deliberate. I want to make it look like the roofing is coming up, because this has been, I don't know, 5-10 years since this building has been maintained. And then on the front of that building, something that resembles a air conditioning vent. That grill was off the back of a Russian tank, if I remember correctly, and I made a box of styrene to surround it. Again, that spare part was a bit damaged, but it doesn't matter. This is a post-apocalyptic diorama. The more damage, the better. And for the tall building on the front face, I wanted to break up the flat wall, so I put that grey piece there. That's actually a piece of rail from a trumpeter rail set. And then on the right hand side of that, again, a little bit of brass rod, a box that looks a little bit like a sort of an electrical junction box or something similar at the top. And then I decided for that ladder, it looked a little bit too intact, so I broke a few pieces of it off, made it look like the ladder's corroded through, rusted away and so on. I know that ladder looks like it goes nowhere, but you know, it can be some kind of maintenance access for the roof or something similar. Another idea which I didn't do, which maybe I should have done, would be to put a sort of safety cage, like a security cage around the ladder. That could have looked quite nice as well. I did have a few problems with bubbles in the hydrocal for the base. I did try to get around that by opening those bubbles up with some tweezers or a knife and trying to turn those round bubbles into sort of cracks and general damage to the road. Often old roads have had lots of repairs made to them and they're being patched up and so on. And I wanted to simulate the effect you see here, whatever this material is that they use to seal those repairs in. And I used some Vallejo plastic putty to do that. And once I was happy with that, I gave everything a coat of grey primer. Oftentimes if you're using the rattle cans, you can melt the plastic, like the XPS foam, but if you're careful you can get away with it. In this case I covered over the foam with masking tape, but if you spray from a good distance you should be okay anyway. And as a little bit of pre-shading, I then went over that with a small amount of black, keeping the black more intense towards the bottom of the building, which will be dirtier, and lighter towards the top. For the painting of the walls, I airbrushed on some XF9, which is a dark red colour. I did my best to get into all the gaps. I did my best to paint from below and above and from the sides as well to get rid of all the gaps, but you can see there's a few there, but they will get covered up later on. I then took a variety of reddy, orangey brown colours and picked out individual bricks. And I realised that this looks quite horrible right now and there's huge contrast between these colours. That's one of those things where you just got to realise it will be toned down later on, and actually if you don't make the effects bright and contrasty now, they'll be lost completely by the end. And I think you agree, having just added the gloss coat, already that started the blending in process there. I wasn't sure how to do the cement between the bricks. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. I could have put the modelling paste on over the top and tried to wipe it away, but instead I went for this grey enamel paint, and it would flow well between the bricks because of the gloss coat. Again, I know that looks quite ugly, but if we look at the reference images, there are lots of examples of those brick walls where there's lots of white and light grey colours, and I think it looks fairly realistic personally. I thought this project would be a great time to use these graffiti decals from Green Stuff World. I've got 2 sheets of them, as you can see here. Some of them are quite specialised and I can't see many projects where I'd like to use them, but I picked a few sort of relevant ones. Now obviously getting decals to go down on this really heavily textured and rutted surface would be quite difficult. I did prep the surface with some Tamiya mark fit. And then once the decal was down, I put more mark fit over the top as well. I think with hindsight I didn't quite get these to conform to the brick surface the way I would have really liked them to. They don't quite show that pattern of bricks through, but nevertheless I did my best. Another way to blend these decals in is to use a sponge and to sponge over parts. Another way to get these decals to blend in is to sponge over bits of the underlying colour. So in this case the grey for the concrete, in the case of the others the dark red of the brickwork. And that gives the impression that they're quite old themselves, they've been fading off a little bit, flaking away. It makes them look a bit more like they're part of the wall. To paint the main doors, I primed them in black. I gave them a light grey coat of paint, and then I used some thin enamel streaking grime as the brown colour to give the initial wood colour there. I haven't shown that process because it's quite boring to watch, but that's what I've done so far here. And the effect I wanted to achieve here was one of a painted door that was heavily chipped, lots of paint flaking off, revealing the wood and the rusty metal beneath. So I took my 3 standard colours that I use for rust and I applied them on the metal parts of the door. So the saddle brown colour first, then some spots of the orange colour, and finally some of the dark brown. And I think that gives a fairly decent rusty effect. Next I gave the entire door surface a coat of hairspray, and then I used a mix of these 2 Tamiya paints, medium blue and flat blue, and I airbrushed them over the top of the hairspray. So you're probably familiar with the hairspray technique. Once you apply water to the paint and it soaks through the paint, it dissolves the hairspray, and when the hairspray dissolves it chips away the paint on top. So by using a stippling action there, you can see straight away the rusty effect is revealed beneath because the blue paint has been chipped away. And I wanted a really heavily worn effect here. And again, as I chip away the blue in this part, obviously you can see the wood because that's what's below. Maybe I've gone a little bit too heavy on this, but as I say, this is supposed to be a really old, like 10 years plus, completely unmaintained door, so I can see it being quite heavily damaged. And that's the final result that I ended up with. And here we can see what they look like when they're in place. I think they fit in quite nicely there with the old brickwork. For the doors on the side of the building, I made them out of styrene sheet, and I made the frame a part of the door because these doors are not going to open. I want these doors to have a heavy metal fire door kind of appearance. I primed them in black, and then again I used the standard rust colours. This time I sponged them on. So the saddle brown first, then the orange, and then the dark brown. And here you can see the effect before the paint goes on top. It doesn't matter that there's still some black in the corner there, that's absolutely fine. Again, on an abandoned building, black can represent mould and all kinds of things. Here I wanted to try a new effect with flaking paint using this crackle paste. I'd never tried this before for this effect, so I had no idea how it would work out. Basically, you spread this paste very thinly onto a surface, and when it dries it creates a cracked pattern. The thicker the paste is, the fewer the cracks. The thinner the paste, the finer the cracks. So I put a few pieces here just on the bottom of the door, maybe to represent sort of water seeping up the door. And you can see when the paste dries, that's what it looks like, that very nice cracked pattern. I gave this door a coat of hairspray and then a coat of green paint, and as you can see, it looks fairly good. The cracked pattern has kind of come through to the paint. The contrast between the cracked area and the non-cracked area is not as visible in real life as it is on the camera. And then I used water again to do the chipping technique, just like I did for the blue doors. In this case there's no crackle paste, so I'm chipping the whole door. For the door where I did use the crackle paste, I made sure not to do chipping over that because that would reveal the yellow crackle paste beneath. And here you can see the final result. And you can see here the crackle paste I've left alone. The effect's quite nice. It looks like the paint's flaking a little bit. It's very subtle, but I do like it still. And there's the door in place. And for the window I showed earlier, a very similar effect. Black painted background, rust colours on the window frame, hairspray, blue paint over the top, and chip it away with water. To make the glass I use this finest plastic from a box of strawberries, glued in place with some PVA glue. I mentioned earlier that I wasn't really satisfied with the texture from the sandpaper for the roof, so I covered that with a mixture of PVA glue and water, and I used these stones to cover that to give a better texture. They're probably slightly out of scale, but they look pretty decent. And of course I would paint these later on as well. I decided that the roof of the smaller building was looking a bit bland, so I used this photo etch barbed wire and I wrapped it around a pencil to get the coils that I wanted, and then I super glued it roughly onto the edge of the roof. I think that really helps with the kind of rough appearance of this kind of area of town. It doesn't matter that the barbed wire is not perfect because of course, again, it's old, it's decaying, it's abandoned. To make the fence at the end of the alleyway, I use this finest mesh from this splatter screen. This protects against grease splashes and it's used for draining from pots and pans and for scale modelling. This cost me about $1, I think. The hardest part of this was getting the mesh away from the frame and not cutting my fingers off in the process. But once I'd done that, I made a rough rectangle for some brass tubing, made a rectangle of the mesh and attached it to the tubing with some super glue, and then I used some wooden skewers as the fence supports, and those metal attachments there are just random pieces of photo etch that I had from the spare parts box. Here is the fire escape, painted in rust colours and hairspray chipped and then painted in black over the top. And I decided that once this building is in place, I'm going to have the bottom part of the fire escape ladder having broken off, and that's going to provide part of the kind of the peril of the scene. That basically that female character we had was trying to climb this ladder and it broke, so she's unable to escape the zombies that are chasing her down the alleyway. And of course we have this fence at the end of the alleyway which is preventing escape as well. So she's sort of trying to climb that there. Let's take a look at the buildings as they stand at the moment. Obviously they're unfinished. So that video has taken care of the basic building and painting of the diorama. In the next video I'm going to be adding lots of items in the alleyway to make it look a bit more lived in. Some of those will be from the spares box, some of those will be scratch built. Then I'm going to be weathering everything, adding a little bit of vegetation and adding the figures of course at the end as well. So until that video, thank you very much for watching. Please remember to give it a like if you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time.